country and we the people on UST Party Radio.
Welcome to UST Party Radio, God, Country, and We the People, with Bill Gruber and Kaz Taylor.
In 1980, President Jimmy Carter was running for re-election against my man, yes. Ronald Reagan.
Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. What a deal.
You know, and actually the times were kind of similar because it was a time of poor economy, record unemployment, great anxiety for many Americans. You know, the circumstances that Americans face today are far greater, of course, but because of his straightforward policies and really brutal honesty with the American people, Reagan won the election by, I guess you could say it's a landslide.
Yeah, I thought it was a good idea to bring this segment on today because as we looked through some of the speeches and things like that of Reagan, what he had to say in this election campaign in October 24th, 1980, his address in that campaign really is appropriate for us today. Many of his observations and recommendations are really, in fact, even as timely today as they were during his election 31 years ago when he actually beat Jimmy Carter in a landslide. And we have a guy whom we love around here. His name is Frank Shelton. He's a minister and a celebrity impersonator, and he's going to talk about our friend Ronald Reagan. Isn't that right, Bill?
All the troubles that we face today, it's time to ask, what would Ronnie say? With all the troubles that we face today, what would Ronnie say?
Well, Frank Shelton, a.k.a. Ronald Reagan voice. We're going to ask you a question here, President Reagan. We're hoping actually to glean from your common sense strategies of when you were running for president. Why don't you describe America and how it was when you were running against Carter way back in 1980?
Kaz, once there was the great, confident roar of American progress, growth, and optimism. There is now the eerie, ghostly silence of economic stagnation, unemployment, inflation, and despair. If you are like most Americans, you and your family know that sound of silence. You experience it around the dinner table when there is a discussion of how to pay for the children's education. You've experienced it in the supermarket when you pick up an item, look at the price, and placing it back on the shelf only to move on.
Wow.
You or a loved one may have personally experienced that silence in the place where you once worked when it had to shut down.
Yeah, Mr. President, you know, that sounds frighteningly similar to our present economy, only it's immeasurably worse in 2010. Americans are generally pretty resilient. How did they respond to that kind of difficulty in your day, Mr. President?
Well, Bill, on street corners of our city neighborhoods, it is a silence filled with anger and bitterness. On farms, it is a puzzled silence filled with questions of how things could go so wrong in a land as blessed as ours. Yes, the mighty music of American economic progress has been all but silent.
President Reagan, I can't tell you how thrilling it is to have you on the radio with us way up here in 2010. It's amazing how things are not so different from your election days in 1980. You know, many Americans believe that the elections this year are going to be pivotal to returning things back to where they should be. Was this true back when you were running against Carter?
Kaz, yes. I felt that election would determine whether the nation and the world would ever again hear that great sound of a prosperous America. Whether the dinner table of your home and the supermarkets of your neighborhood would ever again be places where plans could be made and necessities could be purchased without the gnawing doubt and, yes, fear brought by an unstable economy and unemployment.
You know, Mr. Reagan, we're experiencing really those same emotions today. Any further thoughts on that?
Yes. In my day, as I made this speech, nearly 8 million American men and women were out of work. You or a loved one may have been unfortunate enough to be one of them. Their distress was obvious. Savings may have been destroyed, houses lost, and families unfed.
Well, Mr. President, you know, a lot of economists today look at what has happened of late, in particular the subprime housing market was really the first domino, you know, that fell, that caused the recession that we know of today. What was it like when you were running for president?
All of the sectors of the American economy, few had been so hit as hard as that of housing.
Wow.
My vision for America was always to have an economy that works for the people and doesn't seek to use them for policies made in Washington.
Wow. Jobs have always seemed to be going back to jobs, President Reagan. There seems to be a lot of, shall we say, abuse of Americans by government. Some of it has to do with the job thing. Some of it has to do with loan things and things like that. Voters are really adamant against government spending, for example, these days. Is that similar to your time, Mr. Reagan?
Well, one of the most critical elements of my economic program was the control of government spending. Billions of dollars of waste, extravagance, fraud, and abuse in federal agencies simply were being ignored. Let me give you an example. And there are, sadly, many, to show you what happens to your tax dollars. The GSA, the General Services Administration, was the agency that brought government supplies and managed federal property. There were more than 130 indictments, and GSA auditors estimated they were looking for $100 million lost to fraud and another $130 million lost to mismanagement every year. The GSA remained a mess, and the men who tried to clean it up were no longer in the GSA.
It's interesting that you should say that, Mr. President. Today, it seems like anyone drawing attention to government corruption or mismanagement may lose their jobs as well. What would you do about that, Mr. Reagan?
I would put the corruption fighters back in charge at GSA to finish the job they started.
Yes.
And that goes for every department, agency, bureau, and the executive branch. I would appoint men and women in key positions who share my belief that it is the government and not the people that must cut back spending. And I would work with citizens' task forces to examine every department and agency.
Wow. When you talk about dramatic cuts, that's really the nervous system of Americans today. And we've only got about 3 minutes left, so we may skip to another question later. But for now, let us ask this question. When you talk about dramatic cuts, everybody goes, cut somebody else and not me. What are your thoughts about that?
Kaz, this strategy for spending control does not require slashing necessary programs. To the contrary, I would defend the integrity of the Social Security system and work to improve those programs which provide for the disadvantaged and those who need it most.
They say that drastic problems often require drastic solutions. You've heard that. Well, besides slashing programs, what else would you do, Mr. President?
The second major element of my economic program is a tax rate reduction plan. That plan calls for an across-the-board 10% reduction in personal income tax rates in each of the next 3 years. Carter didn't think that could be done. And I wouldn't be surprised if your current administration feels the same way. President Carter favored the current crushing tax burden because it had fit into his philosophy of government as the dominating force in American economic life.
Wow. Well, Mr. Reagan, history, we have the opportunity to look back in history and seen that your tactics really did turn the economy around back then. I know there were a lot of other elements involved, including energy conservation, exporting, and other factors. But could you boil it down for us? We only have about a minute and a half in this segment, Mr. President.
I'd be glad to. I proposed a strategy which encompassed many elements, none of which can do the job alone. But all of us together can get it done. This strategy would depend on the will of the people to regain control of their government.
That's a wonderful thing you said there, Mr. President. And of course, Kaz, Mr. President is our friend, and he's joined us on many occasions.
Frank Shelton, thanks for joining us. Bill, it's fun to bring back Ronald Reagan, and the things that he said, they really are timely today, aren't they?
Absolutely right, and it just. I so much want to have a leader like Reagan back in the office, but
exactly.
Maybe we have to wait for that. This is UST Party Radio broadcasting from WSRadio.com, the worldwide leader in Internet talk.